April 16th, 2008.
April 16th, 2008.
April 16th, 2008.
April 16th, 2008.
On April 16th, 2008, I was diagnosed with cancer. I don't remember much from the day I was diagnosed, but from what I do remember, I had been sitting out back on the deck getting some fresh air because I had not been feeling good the past week. My father got a phone call, and so I decided to come inside and see if I could tell what was going on.
I had gone to work. Dale's dad had stayed home with him, and he called me and said that our pediatrician was going to call me, so I needed to go somewhere quiet. And about 2 minutes later, the doctor called me on the phone. She said, we have the results of this blood test, and you need to sit down. So I kind of knew something was not good. She said he has leukemia.
Well, I was home from work, and it was about 11:15 in the morning, and the doctor called and started talking to me about what the problem was. And I didn't understand at first because I was thinking it was a different diagnosis, but then she explained it to me exactly what it was, and got concerned. So she asked if I wanted to tell Nancy, or she wanted. I wanted her to tell Nancy. I said, no, I wanted you to tell Nancy because there's a lot of details here I not get right. So.
She said, and we need you to go home and get him, and we need you to be at the local hospital within an hour. She said, as soon as you can possibly get there. There's some things in the suitcase because he's going to be transferred to Johns Hopkins, and we're going to be there for a while.
And you said they took Dale to FMH, and then they're taking him to Children's or Hopkins. He was like, I don't really remember. So we got in the car, and at that point we couldn't contact our parents because, you know, they weren't allowed to have phones on where they were. And finally, several hours later, you know, I got the call, and they said, or we got the call, and it was, Dale has cancer, and all I could say was, okay, thank you, bye, and I hung up.
We were there for a while, and they said, okay, you're going to be transferred to Hopkins after a couple hours worth. And so we were expecting we were going to hit an ambulance, and they came in probably about 2 hours later and said, nah, you're not going to be going by a helicopter because we're, I don't know how they said it, that he's really sicker than we thought he was, and it's just too dangerous. So the helicopter.
I really don't remember anything from my PICU at Hopkins time because everything was a blur because I was so sick.
And walked through the protocol with us, although I don't remember a whole lot of the details about the protocol because there's a lot of what they were talking about over my head. We went through pretty much most of the protocol.
And I remember thinking, wait a minute, what? And I remember saying to him, you mean 37 weeks, right? You just said 37 months. And I think it was Dr. Chen who said, no, it's 37 months, 38 months worth of treatment. And I literally about fell out of my chair. I remember I couldn't speak, and I just kind of sat there and stared at him for a while like, what? He was like, no, it's that long. Treatment has to be that long.
An average day in the hospital, I would, or anywhere from like 7 to 10 a.m. I would wake up, depending on how tired I was from the day before. I would usually just watch TV for a little bit until my breakfast came, eat that, and then I would either, depending if I'm quarantined or not, watch more TV, play some video games, or go down to the playroom, and sometimes even just go for a little bit of a walk.
There were all sorts of monitors, and because everything is being monitored. He had a special thing because they were trying to filter his blood, so he had all this stuff going on.
I remember going in, he was hooked up to a lot of stuff. He was very, very tired, and he was just having problems with his port and bleeding and a bunch of stuff. And it was very, very good to see him. He wasn't like himself, but, you know, obviously he was going through a lot.
I never really did fear death. It was kind of, at the times when it was actually possible, it was pretty much a better option than what I was really going through at the moment, and I would have been like, it was good, and I would have been in less pain. And then the times when it wasn't as good, it was not really a possibility of happening. So I never really feared death at all.
He was back. I mean, he was back to the hospital a couple times a week, the first couple of weeks, for different chemos. You know, you've got chemo on day 1, and day 15, and day 11, and then you have 2 chemos on day 8, and, you know, so we're in and out and back and forth. So it was about every every 2 or 3 weeks he'd be back in the hospital for a couple of days because we'd end up getting a fever and we'd have to go back to the ER.
At night, at first I wouldn't get a lot of sleep because all the nurses coming in and out, but then I got used to it and it was a lot easier to get sleep.
Run to the hospital. We'd be running to the hospital sometimes 9, 10 o'clock at night. Not getting home until 3 o'clock in the morning.
When I lost my hair, not much really went through my mind except for that it was going to be annoying. It was going to be really itchy and really get everywhere. When I had a mask, I really didn't think much of it, and I did notice people would stare at me, but I really didn't think much of that either because I knew it was different. They weren't used to it. I would hope they wouldn't stare, but they did, and I'm not surprised.
Huge amount of weight loss, lost hair, couldn't feel his fingers and toes, really could not walk without help, couldn't even get out of a chair without help, had real GI bowel and everything problems from the chemo, constant, always throwing up. That went on for months till we got that under control. So the neuropathy in the hands and feet, he was really cold, super skinny.
A normal day of clinic would start with us making an hour trip to Hopkins from our house in 5yrCan. We would have to stop and put some Cream on so I could be nice and numb for the access. We would get there, I would usually hang out in the team room for a little bit, then they'd give my weight, height, then take me back to get access. And then sometimes I would go back to get shots in my legs, sometimes I'd go back to see a doctor, go back to get medicine. It would change with each visit.
Clinic visits were technically, when you were in long-term maintenance, supposed to happen only once every 28 days. But when we first started out, because you didn't have counts that were right, they were too high, most times too low for a while, we were back every couple of weeks. It was like every 2 weeks you were going. Anytime you'd get a fever, we were still back to the ER instantaneously like that. You'd have to throw some stuff in the suitcase and jump in the car and drive an hour plus.
Getting access was when they would stick the needle into my portacath, which is a object in my chest that it basically allows easy access to the blood veins, and they would draw blood from it.
I mean, obviously a lot of things changed, but I mean they were all pretty obvious changes. I mean, my mom wasn't here, my dad wasn't here 2/3 of most of the time, so I mean, me and my sister we were home alone a lot.
When Dale was inpatient, sometimes I would work from home, be here for about half a day, talk to Nancy, see if the doctors came around, visited yet, and then I would pack a dinner and take some any supply that you needed and drive to the hospital and get there maybe about 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Family roles changed a lot in the sense that my older brother and I were alone a lot. My mom spent her days with Dale in the hospital or going to clinic with them, and my father, would work from home just a few, sometimes, and then he would go to the hospital about 1 to, get there about 2:33, which is when I was coming home from school. So Kyle and I were left home a lot. We would come home from school and we'd be there until we went to bed. Then normally my father would come home about that time, go to bed, and then, when my father would go to work, he'd already be up and gone before we were even awake. So we spent a lot of time by ourselves.
There were other days when Dale was inpatient where I would go to work pretty much all day, and then I would, depending on what was happening, I might need to take care of some things at work. So I'd go to work all day and leave there and go up to the hospital.
Kyle and Claudia were kind of totally left on their own. Claudia had to find her own ways back and forth to dance. Kyle had a car and he was able to get around some, but he was working, so he wasn't here. So they were left alone a huge amount. When Dale was inpatient, which was off and on a lot, first month and then a couple weeks later for I think 10 or 11 days, and we just kept doing that. I'd be gone and have absolutely no idea what was even going on here. I mean, I'd call and I'd try and talk to people and try whatever, but it's still not the same when you're an hour plus away and gone for weeks on end.
When I was here, in a sense, my responsibilities were taking meals as people dropped them off, and sorting mail or bills and, you know, what things need to be done at the house. You know, you're used to having 5 people pitching to do it, and now you're down to, you know, 2 are gone all the time, and the 3rd one is gone most of the time. So, you know, now it's down to 2 kids to run everything. So that was a lot of work.
But first off, I ended up having to quit work, or have to take a leave of absence, so I wasn't even at work. My whole time life, whatever, basically revolved around Dale's health and medical needs. He was on feeding tubes, so there was all that of trying to keep with the calories and the pump going, and making sure he was getting enough, because it was a horribly slow rate, because it's all he could handle. You know, anytime he would get a fever, we'd have to jump in the car and go, so you couldn't plan anything. It's not like I could take him out with me to go grocery shopping, because it was not safe for him for the germs, so I couldn't even leave the house. If I did, he was with me, but it had to be places he could go, which was to the hospital and back, so I couldn't go anywhere, so I was kind of stuck here.
When my mom wasn't there to, per se, help Dale or be nurse to Dale, I was there. I was like second nurse in charge. You know, I knew how to run the feeding tube. I knew how to do all that. I know how to clean it out. You know, I knew which medicines needed to, you know, do certain things when, and you know, I could fill the certain medications or liquid medication for the right amount and do it the right way and give it.
After the intense 8 months of what's called frontline treatment, which was all the inpatient, outpatient, whatever, we finally entered something called long-term maintenance, which meant that we start a cycle and he would get a lumbar puncture and chemo into his spine. He would also get chemo into his port, and then we would also start in that same night get steroids that you would take for twice a day for 5 days, and another chemo pill. Then every night after that, he would have to take that one chemo pill, and then every week in between that time, he was taking another pill.
So one time he was getting spinal tap, and the doctor missed the first time and couldn't. It was just a mess. You know, it was just me there holding his hand and, you know, trying to keep him from crying and stuff like that, and being okay. And that's really, you know, as he's screaming that he doesn't want to do any more of that stuff for, you know, someone especially.
Had chemo every night for every day for the next 2 3/4 years. Once a week, then he got a second chemo, and then once every 28 days, he got stuff in the port, and then all the steroids that you took for twice a day, 5 days straight.
I couldn't pronounce any of the chemo names to begin with. After a while, you tend to know what they all
The
are.
toughest part of treatment was, well, there were really 2. There was the constantly getting sick a lot, which was annoying because I would get everything and anything, and I'd have to stay out of school, have to go back to the hospital for anything. It was never fun. And the other part was the constant weird allergic reactions to half the stuff I was given.
But as treatment went on, you know, it's second nature in some ways. That's what I almost identify with. You know, oh, my brother has cancer. You know, it's one of those things that it consumes your whole life, whether that's good or bad or whatever. So it's a lot you think about a lot more than you think.
I guess, well, a life lesson would be that there's a lot of great people out there that you meet who even, I mean, we went through a bad, trying time, but even there's other people out there who go even through worse trying times.
One thing I have learned through this whole journey is the fact that tomorrow's never promised, and because of that, you kind of have to change the way you live. You know, it's silly to get mad over little things.
People get sick, people get injured, people get unhealthy, so it's just have fun with what you got. And that's really all there is to life.
So I've really learned how to really love people, which I don't think I knew before. You know, it's like, oh yeah, you know, my brothers, oh yeah, they're my brothers, but you know, I adore them now, and you know, people that you wouldn't normally expect to step up, stepped up and helped, and you learn who really is there for you in that time of need.
I could really, how to be accepting people and to know what they really are and to be okay with that.
It's changed me. I think, I mean, I always was pretty easygoing in some ways, but some ways you'd let stupid things bother you. And now it's like it really doesn't matter. I mean, you know, gosh, I'm in education, and school was always the most important. And unless you were throwing up or really had a fever, you went. And now education is still very important, but if you're really not feeling good, and even sometimes, you know, we've had a couple of mental health days where we've done some other fun things, because you have to. You have to, you know, when you've got a child that's sick that you don't even know is going to survive, you have to do other things. You have to have some memories. You have to, you know, yeah, school's important, but in the end, you know, school's not the most important thing.
On my last day of treatment at the clinic, which was actually a few days before my actual last day of treatment, they had a celebration and everyone was happy for me.
Off treatment day, the day you really kind of, you dream about, although you're kind of scared to even think about that when you first get diagnosed. I mean, you're talking 3 years and 4 or 5 months from the time you get diagnosed. And so much happens in between.
It's kind of your safety net, because yeah, there are problems when he's on chemo, but you're kind of like, all right, everything is good, everything is safe, you know. We have these visits, we have, you know, chemo, everything is hopefully going to go okay. But when he goes off treatment, it's kind of like a waiting game, and it's not necessarily fun, and everything you, per se, knew and everything you had centered your life around before is now just kind of gone, which is scary.
It's still very scary, because your whole safety net is now gone, which is, I don't know, other people who've never been through it can't understand that, but you get to that point where the chemo is a comfort in some ways. So it's good, but it's also really scary.
But I kind of knew that I would still have to keep coming back for blood checks for the next few years, and I might still have to take in some meds, but not necessarily chemo meds. I was happy to be off chemo meds, but I wasn't necessarily scared or sad or anything, because I knew I was going to have to do pretty much the same thing for the next multiple years as well.
We've been off treatment, 18, 19 months now, and things are better, getting a little stronger, but we still have a lot of things that we have to contend with. One of the biggest ones is his IgGs. Still are not even on the scale, so any pathogen, germ that comes around, he gets viruses like non-stop. So he's, you know, seems like fine, and then bang, a day later he's got something and he's sick, and sick for a very long time. He'll get, you know, a common cold, which everybody else would be a common cold, and he's down for, you know, 5, 6, 7 days. He also has still the GI problems. I think he's going to all his life have with the gastrointestinal. His system's still not right. He still can throw up at the drop of a hat, and these things really affect him very easily with it. He's got bone loss. We're still working on that one, trying to get it. And what more day-to-day affects him is the fact that his hands and feet have really bad neuropathy. Same thing that caused the GI problems, caused, you know, his fingers and toes. He doesn't have a lot of feeling in them. He can't hold a pencil for any length of time. You know, so there's a lot of day-to-day, can't open things, can't manipulate, can't. And sometimes we see some things with all the chemo that got put in, and he also had whole brain radiation that he misses things, he kind of forgets, a little bit of the organization is really lacking, so kind of some long-term effects kind of, you know, in his brain-wise.
I really wouldn't give up the cancer experience. I mean, yeah, the treatment was bad, and it's just terrible, and you really wouldn't wish that upon anyone. And if I could not have it, I would, but the experiences I had are really kind of irreplaceable, and I feel like I wouldn't have had those if I hadn't had cancer. In the following years, and for most of the rest of my life, or if not all of it, I want to obviously graduate high school, do my schooling, get a nice job, start a family, but I also want to stay involved in raising awareness and money for cancer in general, but especially childhood cancer.